Okay, let's get started. Hi, everybody. Did I just do this? I'm Lucy Bernholtz. I'm the founder and president of Blueprint Research and Design, which is a consulting firm based in San Francisco. I'm also really honored to be the Hand Foundation Fellow at the New America Foundation and a visiting scholar at Stanford. And all of those positions, all of those opportunities have given me the space over the last several years and in the last few months in particular to really start thinking about what is the moment we're in philanthropy and the social sector. And this conversation, which is a complete experiment, so fasten your Petri dishes, we're in for a ride here, is an attempt to see what really happens if we put the folks together in a room who are both providing information about giving and philanthropic data, folks who use that information, the path setters from the Sunlight Foundation and others who've done so much to help us open up government data, and even some app developers and techies who build things from this information to really think about, well, if we had all the data we could possibly need, what would we do with it? And the reverse of that is, what other data could we use? What information would help us be better in our jobs, whether that's a program officer, a nonprofit executive director, a community activist, a techie, a government person, whatever or whoever you are, what information would help you be better at what you do? So before I dive into this, let me say a couple of words of process. We are being live webcast, so everything you say will be heard and picked up and available around the world. So if you'd silence your cell phone, that would help with that. There will be, when we get to the part where you really get to throw out ideas, we've got a guy with a mic, and we'd like you to speak into that. And then we have a couple of folks who are going to appear through the ceiling. Either through Skype or conference call numbers. So we want to make sure we can facilitate that. And please go ahead and Twitter this conversation. I'm actually going to not live tweet it myself because I can only do 3 things at once. But give data. There's quite a few people out there following it. And if we've got some folks trying to track that so we can include those conversations here as well. I want to say thank you very, very much to New America Foundation, to the Hand Foundation, and to the Sunlight Foundation for helping me think through, again, what is really an experiment so we can take this wherever it's useful to you. So thank you for being here and helping to make this conversation happen. The way this is going to work, I'm going to say a couple of things. Clay Johnson from the Sunlight Foundation is going to tell us a little bit about how they've tried to experiment with data and the open government movement. We're going to hear from 6 or 7 people representing a number of different organizations who are already making data available. This is a completely different conversation than we would have had a few years ago because data from and about giving and philanthropy and social sector change and indicators is available. You can get it on your iPhone now. It's not universally available. It's not available from everybody. But these folks who are going to come do a 90-second sort of here's what we make available to you are going to tell you what they've got and what they're making available. And then you're going to put it to use. Okay, so you actually have to do some work this afternoon. It's not just a free sandwich. And we're going to try to gather those ideas. And then we'll decide what to do with them. Maybe there's groups of you who begin to make some connections. There's a pretty different range of organizations here. You'll find somebody to work with. Maybe we'll have apps for community competition after this. Maybe we need to have conversations like this in other places around the country. Maybe there are new connections to be made at the national and international level. I hope all of those things happen. That's my goal for this conference. We are basically living in a moment when there's kind of an ozone layer of information. And how do we connect it, make it what we need, use it to do what we're doing, and then contribute our information back? It's an incredibly exciting moment, and I'm thrilled that you're here with me. We started because we're here because sharing information makes us all better at what we do. A few months ago, I wrote an open philanthropy manifesto that was inspired by some work that the Sunlight Foundation is doing. It's available on the web. It's also, you have a copy of it here. That led to a whole bunch of conversations that led to this meeting. And basically, what I think we need is to really think about data as an asset, as the platform for change, in the social sector, working in partnership with government, working in partnership with business, how to make that open and interoperable so that we can actually connect different data sets, to experiment with what we need, and to think about data as the basis of change in two ways. One is it allows for the creation of really cool tools. If you don't have the Sunlight Foundation's Real-Time Congress iPhone app, get it. If you don't have the World Bank's free data minder app for its 50 years of performance indicator data, get it. It's unbelievable what you can see and what you can do. And you're probably already using this kind of information. If you ride the bus and you now know when the bus is coming, that's open data, if you ever use one of those apps. So how can we use those kinds of tools to really create change? The other key thing that data unleashes is crowds. We'll talk a little bit about that, but what we've seen in just the last 6 months is this incredible shifting in both who uses data and who sources the data through the crowdsourcing opportunities from Ushahidi on out. And how do we think about those communities of change and what information they would make available? So very quickly, we have lots of data. Data from government on up, from DC to the World Bank. We have data about government, Sunlight Foundation, Subsidy Scope. We have data from foundations. Here's a list of the 4 foundations that are currently streaming their data in our RSS feeds. This is the Glass Pockets website that comes out of the Foundation Center. We have data from and about giving. We have an incredible ability to look at grants on maps against census information. Again, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation is streaming their data about where their money is going. GrantsFire is a new initiative of the Foundation Center that helps pull this information together in a standardized way. The international aid development community is really leading in this arena. The International Aid Transparency Initiative, which I'm hoping we'll hear from through the ceiling, and aid data are both incredible examples of data that's been standardized from a number of different sources, and you can now search all of the different kinds of aid data that's available for certain issues in certain places around the country. We have data about social enterprise and social entrepreneurs. You can search for a social entrepreneur. You can search and you can sort it and widget it and capture it and fund it and learn from it. We have data about online giving, which is a fast-growing part of how people are doing their giving, and we're beginning to be able to see what's happening there. And we have giving platforms and lending platforms that are making these data available so that you can just access them. The Kiva loan platform opens up its data sets, and this is a tool that was created by somebody in the community so that they could reverse engineer the loan data so that they could figure out which microfinance institution partners had religious and other parameters about their work so that they could focus on the ones they wanted to focus on. It's just a beginning example of what's possible once you can access some of these data streams. The Open Philanthropy Manifesto, as I said, I really want you to be thinking about 2 ways of thinking about data. What are the tools that could be created, whether it's an app, a real-time data feed, a mashup, or who are the users and who are the sources. So if one of the ways data might be useful is if you think about how nonprofit organizations are created and then monitored over time and their role in the community looked at, is there a space for crowdsourcing peer reviews that would actually really change the conversation and expand and improve the conversation about what our communities need in terms of services and who's providing them? And we've also got some examples. I'm hoping that Beth Noveck from the White House will be able to join us over the phone to tell us about the peer-to-patent experiment, which was an extraordinary initiative that's now fully operable, in which the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is using crowdsourced expertise to help think about what ideas are patentable and which ones aren't. So rather than having to rely solely on the few hundred incredibly busy patent officers, they've been able to access all of the wisdom of people, whether it's about new types of software or new types of plumbing. They can access the people who really understand those arenas. So there's this question of tools and there's this question of communities. I'm going to ask our data sources to come up here. I'll introduce them as they're walking up here. That's you guys. Because you're a source, Gavin. You're a source of inspiration. You're a source of yo-yo wonderment. I'll briefly introduce them. This is Gavin Clabaugh of the Mott Foundation. You got to stand up. There's no sitting down. Come on up. Come on up. Oh. Jessica Sloan of Aid Data, Aleem Walji of the World Bank, Brad Smith of the Foundation Center, and Dennis Whittle of Global Giving. Each of these folks represents, in their own way, a source of information, a source of available data for folks trying to make change happen in community. I'm going to ask you very quickly to tell us what data you're making available, how it's available, and who's doing cool things with it, or what are some of the cool things you think people can do with it. So, Gavin, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. What data is available? Well, data as of yesterday of every grant that we make. The amount we gave and who we gave it to. And we put it out in about as many ways as I could figure out to do it. It's posted online in a searchable database. It's fed through RSS. It's marked up in micro formats so it can be machine readable and digested and consumed by other machines. And then finally we tweet it in a very succinct way, saying that we gave X dollars to Y organization to do Z things.
Fabulous.
And
what are people doing with it?
Haven't a clue in it for the most part. I know what I'm doing with it. Our next step is to we just finished geocoding all the grantees, and now I'm about to geocode all the geographic scope so I can map it.
Cool. Great. Jessica?
Great. Well, aid data just launched in March, and it's now the largest repository of development aid that comes from official sources. So that would be governments and multilateral organizations. In the future, we are going to be expanding it to also include data from foundations. How it's published is we have an online portal at aiddata.org, and it's fully searchable. You can search by keyword or by a number of parameters, donor, year, source, etc. And we have data that now goes up to 2009, pulled from public databases, direct from donors, some of it's feeds that come from donors, etc. Who's doing cool things with it? Aleem, for one, actually. His group at the bank is helping us work this summer with a bunch of university students to geocode a lot of our data so people can see where projects are. We also are working a little bit with Google to help with some visualizations, because for people who aren't database people, that they can see over time how this data is being used.
Great, thank you. Aleem?
Thank you. So we at the World Bank just launched about 2 weeks ago our kind of open data project, and as Lucy mentioned, that allows all of our world development indicators over 50 years, over hundreds of countries. I think it's now all well over 120 countries. That's now machine readable, downloadable, free, etc. Which in addition to the world development indicators, that also includes the global finance indicators, gender data, educational data, health data, etc. And what we really want to do now is get into what we call microdata, which is the subnational data set. So we're still kind of working on that. But it's a huge database. Lots of people are already doing interesting things with it, including the likes of Microsoft, Google, Gapminder Foundation, etc. But we want to make it much more useful to a kind of end user, sort of the citizen, particularly in the developing world. So we're working on the creation of an Apps for Development challenge, where we want to actually focus more on subnational data sets and see if we can have the equivalent of, the local crime rate data for DC that lots of us know about, or the bicycle app, in the UK, that could be on access to water, access to medicines and clinics in the context of the developing world. So that's something that we hope to launch very soon.
Thank you. Brad?
Yeah. Just a little bit of a historical perspective. The need for this kind of information is not exactly new. What's really changed is the technology. When the Foundation Center was created, it actually, what a lot of people don't know about it, it was created in the 50s, partly because of 2 congressional hearings where foundation presidents were being investigated for the sector's alleged support of un-American activities. This was during McCarthyism. And the response of foundations was to pull together a meeting and say, look, the only way to deal with this is to prove we have nothing to hide, to be transparent. And the Foundation Center grew out of that in 1956, originally as a library with 7,000 documents that had been hand-compiled and put in file cabinets for public inspection about foundations. A number of years later, that required having an office in Washington, D.C., so people could actually physically go to the Internal Revenue Service and hand transcribe information from tax returns of foundations, because at that time they couldn't be copied. So what's really changed the technology, not the need, and what we can do with the information. What do we have for the foundation sector? The main source of information remains tax returns, 990 PF tax returns. PF means private foundation. The Foundation Center gathers all that information for about 97,000 grant-making foundations in the United States and beginning to collect it from outside of this country. We know who gives the money, who gets the money, where it goes, what it goes for, coded, sorted in lots of different ways. Who uses that information? Largely people looking for grants. If you stop and think about it, that's a very good demand for this kind of information. People are looking to get resources from foundations. So rather than try to go to 97,000 different sources, they try to find a single source where they can search it and try to get grants. I think the frontiers when it comes to foundations, because compared to the World Bank, the amount of money that foundations give is relatively small. It's about $45 billion a year.
More than the World Bank.
But their assets are not small. Their assets are roughly almost $600 billion. So I think some of the frontiers are mission-related investing, the data on what foundations are doing in terms of investing for their missions, corporate pro bono, and then global data on philanthropy, which is just in its infancy.
Thank you. Dennis?
Well, just following up on what Brad said, I'm determined that we're going to get over this inferiority complex. In fact, Americans alone give away $300 billion a year. World Bank lends on net every year probably around $30 billion now, 30, 40, 20, somewhere in there. So the aggregated power of all these people is far greater than the official aid agencies or the big foundations. So global giving, our mission is to enable anyone in the world with a good idea to post that idea, to post a project, and anyone in the world to connect with that and fund it directly with minimum necessary intermediation. So far there have been about 2,600 projects funded by about 100,000 individual donors. Also Nike, North Face, Gap, Pepsi, Moody's, Dell reach millions of their consumers using the same data. We make it available in APIs to anyone who wants to use it, as well as to companies that want to import it into their platform. And we've learned a lot along the way. I think it's great that we're having this because we've learned a lot along the way about producing information that gets consumed and information that doesn't get consumed. Yep. And at the beginning, we produced some great data and nobody consumed it. And we've learned over time that open, simple, and dynamic trumps closed, complex, and static any day of the year. And I just read something from a book by John Kay from the Financial Times that I just want to close with that I think is really important to this. It really struck me. John says, our approaches in life are iterative and adaptive. We make our choices from a limited range of options. Our knowledge of the relevant information and of what information is relevant is imperfect. Different people make different judgments in the same situation, not just because they have different objectives, but because they observe different options, select different information, and assess that information differently. Even with hindsight, it will often not be possible to say who was right and who was wrong.
Thanks, Dennis. Is Owen Barter from IATI on the phone?
I am. I'm going.
Hi, Owen. Can everybody hear him?
There he is, right there. You can see
there he is. Owen, I actually messed up the agenda a little bit here, but I want Owen to tell us a little bit about IATI, which is the International Aid Transparency Initiative, and then I'm going to bring up Clay Johnson from the Sunlight Foundation. So, Owen, tell us about what you're doing, what data is available, what you're trying to do, and who's in part of it.
Thanks very much. Well, the International Aid Transparency Initiative is a group of 18 big official donors, mainly government donors, so including people like the UK government, the German government, the Scandinavian governments, but also the World Bank, the UN, the European Community, the Hewlett Foundation, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation, who've come together to agree a standard for how they will publish aid data. And the idea is that they agree the details of what specifically will be published. how it will be published, so in what kind of format, in what kind of electronic form, how it is that you will go about demanding that that data is published if it isn't available to you and if it isn't out there, and a process for updating that over time. So the idea is that it becomes a bit like an accounting standard for aid. And the purpose of this is that anybody who wants to use that data, whether it's a database or an accounting program or a website or an NGO or a parliamentarian, can pull together all the data from across the donor system and pull it together in one place in a common format. Because at the moment what happens is lots of organizations are individually quite transparent. They put their projects online, they have databases online, you can get PDF documents, but it's actually impossible for anybody in a developing country to find out all the people who are doing AIDS projects in a particular area, or all the people who are spending money in a particular community. And so what the International Aid Transparency Initiative tries to do is to make all these different efforts at transparency by all these different organizations actually usable, to make that actually usable to an end consumer who wants to aggregate that data and mash it up with lots of other kinds of data, with poverty data or geographical data or mapping data or data about private investment flows or commercial flows or whatever it is. The 18 donors constitute just over half of global aid, as measured by the DAC, and a couple of other donors are interested, they're taking part in the process, but haven't formally signed up to being part of it. So the United States, for example, is attending the meetings, is participating in the discussions about the standard, and we very much hope that they will, in fact, in the end, decide to implement it, though they haven't yet committed to do so. We could see data coming online as early as the end of this year as a result of this initiative. That won't be the whole thing, because some of the things that the current draft standard recommends is information that the donors aren't collecting, let alone publishing, things like detailed geographical coding. But the information that they do have and are collecting, they're hoping they'll be able to get formatted and online later this year, and then there'll be a process over perhaps a year or two to collect other information not currently being collected and start to pump that out through the same channels. So the idea is that we have fully open, fully transparent, quite detailed, electronically readable, mashable data from all the donors. And we hope that once the standard is established, that a wide range of people, whether it's foundations or NGOs or governments or international organizations, will all move to adopting the same standard. Because once it exists, it'll be much easier for everybody if all the data is published in that one form.
Thank you, Owen. That's great. So as you can see from the folks who've just talked, including Owen, there's data available. There's a variety of ways you can access it. There's a lot of work happening on standards in addition to EADI and its work at the aid level. I know the Council on Foundations and its technology group is working on standards. The Foundation Center is obviously a leader on standardizing information. What we're about to reach is a moment when there is going to be a ton of information available. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to put it to use? So I want to ask Clay Johnson, who I mistakenly reversed his role on the agenda here, to replace these fine folks up on the stage here, and tell us a little bit about how this has worked with government data. Clay comes to us from this morning from the Sunlight Foundation, which has been working for several years to make information available on public spending, and they've done a lot of different. They've got a lot of different experiments out there, a lot of different approaches to actually getting folks to use it and see what people want. So, Clay, thank you.
I can just use this. So I want to take a step before I start talking about government. I've only got 5 minutes. So I'm going to talk really fast. There's an industry that has done all of the thinking for us when it comes to this open data stuff. It's already all figured out. Does anybody know what it is? Because we can be real lazy here. It's been figured out. It's been done. This has been done. Anybody know what it is? No. No. It's the biggest open data industry that there is. This whole industry is powered by open data. Food. On every piece of food item sold, what's on the back of it? And ingredients and nutritional information. The entire food industry is powered by open data. How many people here have cooked before in their lives? Raise your hand, right? How many of you have used a recipe to cook? Right. What's a recipe? A recipe is, in fact, the application that we're speaking of here. And how many people have used ingredients to cook with? That's a data source, right? So when we talk about what comes first, is it the tools or the data? It's like saying what comes first, the ingredient or the recipe? Well, it depends on what you want to eat. We have this ability to, what the food industry has done with open data through, in fact, not only regulation but also market incentives, right? So government has said you've got to put this stuff on the back of the potato chips. But also people have said, hey, I bet you I could write a recipe book and make money off of that. Or I could have a cable show and share how I cook and make money off of that. What we have is a really advanced industry in the food industry based around open data. And they create all kinds of mashups. I had these French fries the other day that were, they were good. And they also create all kinds of stuff that's bad for us. But at the end of the day, we've got this sort of amazing space and these amazing mentors to look towards in the food industry as to how to model and replicate ourselves when it comes to open data. We at Sunlight, I got like 2 minutes, is that right?
Yep.
Okay. We at Sunlight have taken this to heart. And we believe that government is, in fact, our ingredients. And it's our job to help find the great chefs of government data. And we do this thing about once or twice a year now called Apps for America, Design for America. Last year we got 100 different applications out. Some people in this room, Forum 1, I think, won the last Apps for America contest with their food processing tool called Data Masher, or data processing tool called Data Masher. It did not make potatoes, much to my chagrin, but instead they said, let's just take 2 data sets and mash them together and see what happens. So people can do things like measure SAT scores and handgun ownership and stuff like that, and mash them together on a map and see what happens. We recently built this thing. We kind of look at ourselves as a refiner of data. So we built this thing called transparencydata.com. There are 4 billion lines of COBOL code in the federal government, and about 2 billion of those, that's an inaccurate number, but a bunch of those lines of code go to measuring our campaign contributions to members of Congress. And so the data obviously isn't very clean that comes out of the FEC, so we take it, clean it up, and mash it up with data from all 50 states and make it so that people can go to an easy database called transparencydata.com and query every campaign contribution known to mankind for the past 20 years, over $250, in all 50 states, state and federal elections. And people can sort of get to the sort of ingredients, other developers can get to the ingredients that they need in order to build their data sets. So the thing I want to leave you with, because I don't have a whole bunch of time, the thing I want to leave you with is look to the food industry as a model for this open data stuff, because it's exactly the same. If you look at the ingredients as your data and the recipes as your applications, then they are exactly the same. And there's always a good hamburger metaphor somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clay. Do I get to keep your chips? That's great. I hadn't heard the food metaphor, but given that we named this a data jam, it seems very fitting. We didn't know why we named it a data jam, so that makes sense. Is Beth Noveck in the ceiling somewhere? Is Beth on Skype? Do we know?
I think she's been disconnected.
Okay. Okay. Maybe we'll get more time for Clay. Beth is going to hopefully join us. She's in the White House Open Government Initiative. excuse me, she's actually moving offices right now, so it was really nice of her to try to carve out this space for us, but hopefully she'll be able to come back and join us. And if not, we'll get more inspiration from Clay. But here's the way this is going to work for the next hour, assuming I can get this thing to work, if I can't get the phone to work. There we go. Whoop, did I do that? There are a number of people in the room, I think, who've actually helped build some interesting uses of the data that are available. I want to show you a few of those and a few others. And I really want to give you a chance to work in a group of 4, 5, 2, 3, whatever it is, people that you're sitting next to think about what you could do, what you need, what would be useful. So let me just run through a couple of examples here. And if we get Beth on the phone, this is primed to stop right where she would join us anyway. So somebody just wave at me if she appears on the line. Okay. Couple of different tools that have been used. So recipes from data, if you will. The nonprofitmapping.org effort by a small group, about 12 people in San Francisco, all volunteering their time. Their interest was what was the rate of closure of nonprofits in the San Francisco Bay Area during the Great Recession. They couldn't find accurate, up-to-date information that would help them answer that question. Being a bunch of activists and techies, they took that question and scaled it nationally. And what they actually wound up building was a scorecard that measures different states and their degree of data transparency about nonprofits, so that, and then they mapped that nationwide so that they could try to begin to prompt the different Department of Corporations and state attorneys general and the folks who hold this information to start sharing it in a real-time way. Because if you're trying to understand who's really providing services in your community, 2-year-old data about the nonprofits doesn't really help you. So nonprofitmapping.org, entirely volunteer-driven, cost about 8 pizzas to build this. Leveraging data 1 times 13. This has just gone live. This is a website portal sponsored by 12 foundations interested in education innovation, and what they're trying to do is leverage the applications to the Department of Education's I3 initiative. So you apply to the I3 initiative, you go through all that paperwork, and then you can upload it here to this foundation registry, and it's available to the 12 foundation partners as well. So a way to both bring funders together and save nonprofits some time, school districts and nonprofits. Again, what I'm trying to do is get you thinking a little bit differently about what you might do in your daily work. We've talked a little bit about apps that have been built on foundations and nonprofit on government and nonprofit data. So EcoFinder helps you find the place to recycle your house paint or your batteries appropriately. I think it's San Francisco only. Do-it-yourself democracy, web app that can put you directly in touch with everybody from your city government on up, lets you know about various meetings, really prompting civic engagement and involvement. And then this is Tree Finder, which helps you identify what kind of tree that is on your street. Mashes up data from the urban forest, Friends of the Urban Forest, and city government data, this one in particular in San Francisco, so that when you can actually identify the type of tree that you're looking at and the types of trees that would thrive in your particular neighborhood. There are apps there are companies that have decided to invent apps that actually reinvent volunteering. If you're familiar with the Extraordinaries, they're making volunteer activities available on the iPhone. It's not that you find them, it's that you do them. However, if you do want to find one, Alista will help you find a volunteer organization or opportunity. So if you've got some time on your hands, if you're in a new place, if you're in your home, and you're looking for ways to actually put your time to good use. So Alista helps you find organizations. Is Gabe here? Hey, Gabe. Tell us about this. This is After School Special, and as I understand it, this was a winning mashup from San Francisco's Data SF's effort to put data out there and help people create it. So I'll explain it, and then you can stand up in a minute and tell us what I got wrong. But it shows you public schools, private schools, public libraries, healthy food and junk food. all on a map of San Francisco so that you can help navigate what your kid eats after school or where they go to get something to eat after school. Is that a fair enough assessment of it, Gabe?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. And Gabe helped build this, pulling data in a data camp led by the city and county of San Francisco. Switch our attention a little bit to the idea that not all data just comes from a central source and is used by the masses. Some data actually come from the masses and then get used by central sources. So this is a map of generated by text messages, truck drivers being asked to pay bribes, mapping where they're being asked to pay the bribes, so that you can actually begin to see where the worst corruption is happening. You never would have been able to see this before. These are totally new types of data coming from crowds and being used by organizations that are trying to fight transportation corruption. So we've got this kind of two-way circle of data going out, data coming in. Ushahidi, I'm sure most of you have probably heard of by now, another text-based, crowdsourced data platform that's now been used, as I understand it, at the very least, not only to help people track riots in post-election Kenya, for which it was started, but we've mapped earthquakes and earthquake relief, snowplows right here in the District of Columbia, and now the cleanup in the Gulf of Mexico as they're using Ushahidi to track the oil coming on shore. An incredible new tool that has the potential to really reconfigure how we think about making change happen. There's also communities that learn together. This is a website of a national group of local organizations building after-school science activities. So again, communities coming together, finding the information they need, and making change happen. There are communities that monitor spending. So they're looking at data that's coming from, actually I don't know where the source of this data comes from, but it's data about earmarks from the federal government, and then folks who are actually on the ground in communities saying, this money is coming to our community, this money is coming to our community. And there are communities that try to solve problems. Global Giving and the Rockefeller Foundation, Innocentive, using crowdsourcing technology to generate new ideas for some of their partners who are addressing certain issues on the ground. So a combination of the crowd, the data, the organizations, all at work. This is where I'll ask again if Beth has joined us.
She's not going to be able to, but I can make a few comments about data.gov and Community Health Data Initiative.
Please, come on up here. Who are you? So I mentioned peer-to-patent earlier. Beth Noveck, the instigator of this, now at the White House Open Government Initiative. Peer-to-patent lets experts on certain issues, certain technologies, get directly involved in doing the lit review, the previous sample sourcing of, has this idea been patented before? Is this idea derivative? Where's it coming from? They've created this. The USPTO is now using it. And then Open Government Initiative from the Obama administration. And we are going to be joined by?
Amin Bhandari. Nice to meet you.
Amin, great.
So
thank you.
Obviously, I got thrown into this literally last second. My name is Amin Bhandari. I work with Beth Noveck in the Office of Science and Technology Policy for Anish Chopra. And, people sitting here in the front row could talk about this better than I can, and so, welcome me to chime in. So obviously these aren't prepared remarks. Unfortunately, Beth can't join us to talk about peer-to-patent, so I won't talk about that. But, she said maybe she'll be able to join later via phone, but I don't think that's going to happen, so apologies for that. So I think, some of you, or many of you in here, have probably seen data.gov, and I think, under the rubric of open government, something that we came up with out of that is something called the Community Health Data Initiative. And so we thought to ourselves, well, you're going to have all of this data, and it's going to be dumped onto the street. What do you do with that? And so we thought, let's put together an initiative where we bring people together in a room, people like yourselves, like on a day like today, and see what we could do with data specifically coming from Health and Human Services. And so on March 11th, the Institute of Medicine convened a meeting with about 50 people. We had tech developers, media people in the room, and then we had very traditional healthcare experts. So this was a meeting of the minds in terms of you had folks like Don Berwick, who has been named the administrator for the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, as the epitome of somebody from the healthcare world, and you had somebody like Tim O'Reilly, and Clay Johnson and other folks who kind of epitomize the other side of the world. And we had them do this, mashup right there real time and said, if you could have any data that you wanted, and also the data that's coming out of Health and Human Services right now and towards the end of the year, what would you do with this? And so we said, okay, you came up with these great ideas, and about 20 or so ideas came out, and we said, what could you do right now in 2010 to provide value using this data, whether it's through a website, some kind of app, tool, whatever the case is. And so we asked people to commit to doing something with those 20 or so ideas, which we narrowed down to 10 or 11 teams. And then we said, okay, now that you've committed to this, we want to see what you can do in the next 8 weeks. And so what's come out of that is this tremendous bubbling of activity where people have come to the table who have never worked together before, whether you've got a traditional, private sector firm, like Ingenix or Institute for Healthcare Improvement, or you've got Sunlight Foundation working with other people to produce tools, applications, websites that are going to show what can you do in 8 weeks when we're extremely focused. And so we're actually launching this community health data initiative on June 2nd at the Institute of Medicine. And there's going to be a tremendous variety of applications that are going to be showcased. And so I think, again, I'll come back to the theme of, it's a showcase of what you can do with an extremely limited number of time with, very focused people. And I think the other thing to note is bringing people together from all different worlds. So we truly have this representation from, traditional government, traditional healthcare experts in this case. You've got the tech developers in the middle, and then you've got the community folks. Because I think at the end, it's about translating what you can do for the community right now with the data that we have. And so the last thing that I'll say is one thing that we discovered in this process, and I've heard a little of this here, is that this is not just about static data that's sitting somewhere, whether it's with a foundation or whether it's with the government. There's a data bucket that's gonna, this fire hose is gonna come out. But there's also data that's being collected in really unique and novel ways that we've seen some examples of. And I think the third area is this idea of data collection. So to use this as a feedback loop, to ask people, what data would you collect if you could get it? And what tools can we develop to collect that information? So they're really simple things. I mean, there are some of the examples we saw on the international side, but on the domestic side, there aren't really good obesity metrics at the local community level. And it's really mind-boggling and profound that we don't have that information. So we have to have a challenge to collect that kind of information. So I think about this data in 3 buckets, and then I also think about the translation aspect, which I think is one of the huge challenges here, to make sure that we can actually sustain some of this, because 1,000 apps will be developed, but how many of these will be actually sustained and be used? So happy to take questions on Community Health Data Initiative and data.gov and anything else. And apologies again for Beth not being here.
Thank you, Aman. That was great. It's great to have somebody in person.
I think that's yours, yeah.
All kinds of paper up here. So now you get to take Aman's challenge. We're going to actually give you folks, if you took one of these when you walked in, if not, there's some out front. And if you'll actually just sort of self-organize, maybe Aman and Clay and others from Sunlight or who's ever here could actually take about 20 minutes and introduce yourself to each other. Before we do that, let me see if we can get a sense of who's in the room, so you know who you all are. But then actually take some time and think about what you might create. You're not obviously going to build anything in 20 minutes, but you can have a few ideas in 20 minutes, which would be great. But before we do that, how many folks here are from foundations? Okay. Raise your hand if you're from the public sector, either DC government, federal government, if you work at one of the major agencies here. Okay. How many of you are techies, are data tool builder type people? And you can tell me what I should have called you. Great. How many of you are from nonprofit organizations? How many of you are just data geek people who wanted a sandwich? Great. Thanks. And how many people are here from the media? A big consumer of this kind of information. Great. Wonderful. Anybody I missed? I've got the international aid folks too, so I don't want to... Anybody else? Anybody else? Great. Mix it up. You can move the chairs around. This is going to get a little boring for the folks watching on the webcast, but mix it up. Make yourself a group of 2 or 3 people. Try to find somebody you don't really know and see what you might do with this information, because we've now got it. Okay. And welcome back to those of you out there on Twitter and watching the live stream. We've got a couple of folks in the room who are monitoring Twitter. I've tried to pull in some of those comments. I'm going to do my best to fold that into this conversation and that conversation out there. the folks in the room were buzzing with ideas. So this is actually your chance. If you created an app, if you built a solution, if you came up with a community need, if you have some suggestions on great things to do with data, please, we'll go around the room. There is, we have a mic so that the folks watching the stream can hear what you have to say. I'm going to do my best to write them down as they come in. I'm going to post it all on a Google Doc. So all of this will go live again. As you know, if you checked in to the site through the newamerica.net web event page, the live stream, the slide deck, the notes from the meeting, all of that will go up there. They'll also go off of Philanthropy 2173, which is my blog, and anybody else who wants to take that stuff, please. My hope is this is the first conversation. So I'm going to try to get your notes. Anybody else who wants to take notes, please feel free, and we'll post them up on the web. So who came up with something? What do you need? What would be the app of your dreams or the community of your dreams? Oh, we got one in the back? Yeah.
I was the note taker for my group, and you mind if I just read them all out?
Please, I'll write as fast as I can.
Okay, one idea. The first idea was an app that shows what the government is funding in terms of foundations in some kind of categorized way, because it's very difficult to see what the government's doing with the money with regards to foundations.
Okay.
It would solve the problem of transparency of that information, and then who would use it would be anybody, I guess, bidding for foundation work or trying to be an implementer. Second was, we called it real funding. I think a gentleman from Mott, this was his idea. But we have this problem in the developing world as well, as the money moves from the funder to the executor to the implementer to the beneficiary, there's a transaction cost. And at the end of the day, what is the real funding that actually makes it to the recipient, whether that be foundation funded domestically in the U.S. or abroad. And who would use it? Anybody would use it that's trying to figure out what's actually going on in country. Third was NGO points of interest. You know, a lot of these advanced smartphones have a GIS, so you could be driving down the highway and you could see the school and you could see who funded that school, something like that. Cool. That would be a transparency tool, and also kind of a way to advertise what foundations are doing. We had a good one made by Clay, which was called Runner Up. So have an application that shows all the projects and proposals that the foundations did not fund, which sounded really, really interesting in terms of disruptive technologies. So you can build applications that address some of the things that people are not funding, and by doing so, you generate a whole different type of innovative approach. And then, actually, that was it. There was another idea of having instead of data.gov, have a data.org. And I'll let the gentleman whose idea it was define it a bit more, but go beyond just the government, but talk about philanthropy in general and how that's going in terms of transparency and mobile application, et cetera. So. Great.
Thank you. Just a question. I'm going to ask this to the room. Oh, do you have a...
Just make an amendment to that.
Yeah.
Real-time funding, real-time information on government funding of nonprofits, and also government real-time information on employment of nonprofits, so that we know trends, how it's going. So, just to
fabulous. Thank you. So that's for the data.org suggestion, or the. No?
The first one, about government being transparent.
Oh, okay. Great. If you're familiar with Pew Subsidy Scope, which was on one of the slides I flashed by, they are actually Subsidy Scope funded by the Pew Charitable Trust, looking at various industries that receive subsidies from the federal government, and one of those is nonprofits. That data, that portal's not live yet, but keep your eye on that one. That might get toward something. It might be a start for what you're talking about. I wanted to just ask that group and everybody in the group, because this has come in from Twitter a couple of times, what data in particular for the kinds of things you just mentioned are you talking about? I think we've mostly been talking about grants data, which foundations are already required to share, but I'm wondering In the runner-up proposal, for example, you were talking about actually sharing non-funded proposals. So as you're sharing your ideas, or if you have thoughts on sort of what data in particular we're talking about, the folks in the Twitter sphere are asking that question, and we may have all different answers. So those are great suggestions. Others?
We got a little bit more micro about the processes, but some of the things that we were talking about were more international opportunities to, like, just change things on an individual level. So one of the things we talked about right away was international volunteer opportunities. So if you're visiting somewhere and you have an extra day, you can just sort of volunteer to do something somewhere. Another one was international funding options. So you can see, if I want to help people in Cambodia or wherever, sort of how that gets there and how likely your money is to actually get there. We're also talking about sort of top-down versus bottom-up of information and how that could be used and where it goes and where it comes from. We were talking about like a human trafficking app, which would be probably similar to the bribery one that we just saw, because that's a very quick sort of predictor of where things are going. And, if you want to catch, drug trafficking or human trafficking or any kind of like sort of international crime situations like that, it would be really easy to track if people just were sending text messages when they saw something like very obviously wrong going by. We talked more about just sort of standards and, how organizations are tagging something as, if your organization buys a sandwich for a homeless kid, does that get tagged as social services, or does it get tagged as youth services or homeless services? And if the organization that does a similar work tags it a different way, how does that interact? And, how do we balance out that information across the board? Is there anything I missed? Okay.
Super. Thanks. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. We also talked about voting and how that should be a lot easier and more reliable, and how we could make that happen both technologically and through sort of a mental and government paradigm shift of how we think about privacy and contracting and information.
Cool. Some of the things that get sort of along those lines that have come in from Twitter, there was a request, or sort of an idea seed about, can you use some version of communities and tools and data to think about how you would track leadership changes in the community? So I don't know if that means in nonprofits or outside of nonprofits, or in government or outside of nonprofits, or all of the above, but some way to actually keep track and see who's changing leadership positions. And then there's been discussion between folks in the room and out of the room and back into the room, which is one of the wonderful things about Twitter, about how do you use these kinds of tools and community sources of information so that they might actually change our governance structures in the nonprofit space? I think that's where the question is focused. So if any of you have thoughts on that, or help develop apps about that, where you've got some folks out of this room who are interested in those same issues. Other suggestions, weird ideas, wacky possibilities?
So our group came up with 4 ideas. You can correct me if I get any of these incorrect. First was an app that would make available geographic data of who's spending money in what program areas. And this would need to include some sort of intelligible taxonomy of the funding areas themselves. This would specifically for use by community foundations who at the moment have difficulty knowing, who's spending money in their own regions. And similar to that would be useful a database for community foundations that that lists what they're doing. I mean, because one foundation doesn't know what any of the other foundations in the country are doing effectively, and it's difficult for community foundations to find out what their peers are doing. So some sort of database that would organize that information would be useful. And then we came up with an idea for a sort of mashup of Foursquare and Facebook that would enable individuals with expertise to make their geographic location known, so that this was, I guess, suggested particularly for international development, if I'm getting this correct, that would enable individuals, Peace Corps volunteers, that sort of thing, to locate themselves geographically and make themselves more available for people who may not know that they're there. And then the last thing that would be useful would be a sort of meta app for finding what apps are out there, what websites, tools, and so forth in the social sector, because at the moment, I mean, I think we probably all had the experience of going, oh, I didn't know that existed, and I didn't know that was there. And I mean, even if you're actively keeping up with this stuff, there's still a lot of stuff out there that nobody, that you may not know about, and nobody can keep on top of all of it. So it would be useful to have something that organizes the information about what tools are available.
Great. Two sources for that I'll just share with you that I know about. Beth Cantors' blog, Beth's blog, does a wonderful job of tracking social media applications and how they're used in the space, not necessarily data-driven apps, but social media. And TechSoup Global, another really good resource there. But yeah, keeping up with the pace of change is no small feat. Other ideas you can, here. We've got about 5 more minutes, so we'll get as many ideas as we can and then figure out how, if and how, to keep the conversation going.
Hi, Chris Woles. I was in the group, several of us, with Jack Warner with World Resources Institute, and they have a lot of data on greenhouse gas emissions from around the world at the country level. And so we thought of an application that would give information and perhaps some inspiration to people going on vacation, tourists, about where to go, and if you're going on vacation, smart choices to make or things you could do to be even helpful on your trip. So an application that built on WRI data, so it would show you if you're going on vacation to Belize, what are the sources of greenhouse gas emissions from there, and for you as a tourist, what can you do or not do to help or hurt on that, or even if you're interested in volunteering, what are some projects going on in that place you're visiting that are trying to target greenhouse gas emissions and that you might want to get involved with.
How many tons your jet on the way to Belize?
Yeah.
Probably the biggest one, yeah. Would you add anything to it?
I think that's great.
Great. Others?
Bears mentioning the NGO repository as well.
Tell us about it, Gavin.
Take the mic, yeah.
Take the mic. One of the things that philanthropic organizations have is information that they use to fulfill the compliance requirements for making grants. So is this organization a charitable organization, especially outside of the United States? That's tough to do. It's called equivalency determination, or ED, not to be confused with other things. Right now, it's not legal for foundations to actually share that information. We can't let Ford Foundation do the work and ride on their laurels. So there is a nascent effort to build an NGO repository and to get a legal status to be able to share that information amongst philanthropic organizations. It's just worth knowing about.
Thank you. And we got another hand in the back there.
All right. Well, first our group, we talked a lot about the process of how an application is being developed, either from the grassroots or from the top down. So we were really interested in learning more. which applications really become realized from an idea to becoming apps. So we didn't understand it very well. Then we talked about different apps either for citizens or for organizations. So we thought that they were very entirely different and different needs. One of our members actually talked a lot about that many apps are driven by selfish, he called it selfish behavior, like Stumble Home. You know, it's based on your individual, pretty selfish need to get home. So, and he thought these were one of the many which occurred now are based on these individual needs. But then we talked also about, well, how could we do something for a more self-help group? And we mentioned HIV/AIDS. So, for instance, to get much better services and help for people with HIV/AIDS. So, or then actually somebody mentioned the issue of elders. Elders need care or help in a community. So how could they get help from that?
Right. Those are great. And I think that's a really critical question to think about is sort of for whom and what happens. And I think there's some interesting efforts out there. We've got another hand in the back, and then I wanted to put two on your radar screen that came in from outside. This is not an easy thing to do, by the way. Don't sign up to do this.
You're making it look very easy.
Facilitate Twitter and this room at the same time. But who has done this before? Some way of seeing what other organizations have tried. So as you, a nonprofit, are trying something, or you as neighborhood association, you could actually find the local experts or find other folks who've tried that thing before. And then request that grantee reports be available in some way so you can see not only the dollars spent and who they went to, but what happened with them. So those are two ideas that have come in from beyond the walls of this room. Yeah, please.
Two little things. One, building on exactly that, what happened, it would be great if at some point there was a simple standard that encompassed all granting, just, you know, so you could code grantor, grantee,
is this you?
Some URL for outcome,
Okay.
some URL for outcome, or maybe, I did tweet something about this, but some URL for outcome, and per what Kurt said, the data itself.
Yep.
Because that, you know, that would be eminently usable and also standardized.
Super.
The other thing that came up in our group, and this comes up all the time, is that you can try something and say, hey, everybody contribute, and then, you know, you hear the other kind of tweeting, the chirping of just the crickets.
Yep.
And that's why a lot of the times you need the moment,
yep,
right, when the tool is going to be useful. Think
right,
of Twitter and Mumbai or Twitter and Iran.
Right.
You know, it was out there, you
right,
know, and Tom Glazier of the New America Foundation, you know, was talking about Twitter, you know, to groups that I worked with many years ago, as were several other people. But you need the moment for the tool sometimes to spread.
Right. And that's fabulous. And that actually, there's a whole set of examples about crisis camps and what happened, again, post-Haiti that we didn't really talk about today, but that speak to that question of sort of what drives the need and the adoption and the uptake, which is a great point. Thank you. Go another hand here, and then it's 2 o'clock, and I'm going to sign us off pretty soon.
Appreciate the highlighting of new data sources and new uses, but I also think it's hard to let an hour discussion of nonprofit and philanthropic data go by without at least mentioning National Center for Charitable Statistics and GuideStar, two databases which have now been around for some time, but are just hugely important and have huge amounts of relevant information for all of us.
Right. Absolutely. And question again of how we use this information. I think it was, actually, I don't remember who. I guess it was Brad who talked about the needs aren't new, some of the tools are new. And some of the ways people want this information is also new. And you know, I think there's just a lot to get into the mechanics. Brad, one more comment, and then I'm going to wrap this up.
I was going to say two things. That in our group, when we were talking about the geolocation possibilities of phones and sort of the Ushahidi real-time reporting back, with some of the data sets we're talking about, there's quite a time lag in the data. When you're talking about international aid flows, government expenditure, census data, foundation data, that data is usually a few years old before you get it onto something. So how you sort of use the ability to sort of have citizen monitoring and citizen feedback to push for having more real-time data. And you've put a slide up there about GrantsFire and Foundation Center and Mott Foundation. I mean, GrantsFire is an attempt to sort of find a way for foundations, which are private entities, to report their data in something that's closer to real time and not just through a tax return. And that's tough when you're talking about private entities. It's tough when you're talking about government. But I'm assuming the demand for real-time or faster data is going to be growing, maybe faster than the supply of it. And I think the second big question we all need to think about is, I think the Sunlight people mentioned that they can, en passant, that they get data and they clean it and then they put it out there. Right. And I leaned over and I said, well, who pays you to clean it? And that's a really interesting question. What are the sustainable business models to clean data? So.
That's right. So let's have that conversation next time. I'd love your feedback on this, okay? As I said at the beginning, it's an experiment. It was prompted by some of the thinking that's in this paper, which is downloadable from the Duke University Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society's website. It'll also be on Philanthropy 2173, written by myself, Ed Skloot, Barry Varela, looking at the way data are becoming a new platform for change, but how that's really going to work and how we're going to work out these tough issues of data standardization and what are the business models and who does the hard work and who really uses it and is it for citizens or is it for organizations and what really matters and what will be the natural event that leads to some massive uptake. I don't know the answers to all those questions, but I think together we have a really good opportunity here, sort of a moment to think about this and to seed it and to experiment with some possibilities about what might be really useful. My sense from observing the Sunlight Foundation, and most of them left because there was a meeting they had to go to, so I'll say this in their absence. It'll be recorded for posterity. They had a really good sense of the data that were available and what they needed to do to them. They were probably taken by surprise with how they've been useful and to whom. And I think we stand that possibility as well. But this is the direction that we're going. I think it's thrilling that you've joined in this conversation, and I hope that you've made some new connections and that will improve your work and that maybe there's a next step for all of us together. So again, I want to thank the New America Foundation, the Hand Foundation, the Sunlight Foundation, and really all of you for joining in this conversation. Thank you.